So hi everyone, Nova Africa Student Group is very pleased to welcome Professor Séverine Toussaert to the NSG video series. Hello Professor. She is an assistant professor at the London School of Economics. She received her PhD from NYU and her research interests are behavioral economics, experimental economics and decision theory. So thank you so much for being here. Can you explain us briefly the paper that you just presented and the main results, please?
Mm-hmm. So I've done a lot of work trying to understand the structure of temptation, trying to understand why people might want to restrict their choice set, what drives them to tie their hands, to think about, to commit their future self. Okay? And the most popular model in economics, in behavioral economics, is the model of present bias that was developed in the 90s, that says that the only reason why people might want to restrict their choice set, demand commitment, is because they think they're going to succumb to temptation. However, there is another class of models of costly self-control, à la Gulden-Pessenhofer, developed in the 2001 and later, that says that, well, there is another reason why we might want to restrict our choice set, which is eliminate the cost of exerting self-control. So I designed an experiment that allows me to try to identify those types, those agents who might want to restrict their choice set, demand commitment, even if they expect to resist temptation, to eliminate the cost of exerting self-control. And I think that's important from a policy perspective, because if unchosen alternatives affect our choice set, then removing those options from the choice set might be welfare enhancing. For instance, in the context of smoking bans, we might want to understand who is affected, whether former smokers, for instance, face self-control costs that are eliminated in the presence of smoking bans. So I designed an experiment that allows me to observe these self-control costs in a very controlled environment, the environment of the lab. So the experiment that I conducted was at New York University, which is the university where I got my PhD. And during this experiment, I had to think about a temptation. My subjects were tempted by reading a story. So I used curiosity to, if you want, generate temptation. And the trade-off they were facing was basically working on a boring task where they had to look at a 4-digit number that was updated every second. And at random times during that experiment, they were prompted to enter the last number they saw on their screen. And the alternative was, well, they could take a break, read the story, and that story was actually a story that was written by one of the other subjects in the room. Okay, so that they could be interested in learning what others came up with, or they could be interested in learning whether their own story was selected. So I wanted to see whether those subjects would be tempted by the story, and reading the story was costly. So if they read the story during the task, they would be paid less for actually correctly answering the prompts that they were receiving. So I asked them, well, would you be willing to pay to actually remove the option from your choice set, not to have the option to read the story during the task? And I tried to see how their demand for commitment relates to their beliefs that they would indeed resist the option during the task, and the actual choice. So if they face the choice during the experiment, I would want to see whether they indeed succumb or resist. So how do I do this? Well, I asked them to rank 3 options, which is, I'm not going to have the choice to read the story during the task. I'm going to postpone. I want to decide during the task what I'm going to do. Or I'm going to commit right now. I want to have the story, so I'm just going to commit right now to have the story. They ranked those options, and so I have about a quarter to a third of my subjects who say I strictly prefer that you remove the option from my choice set, and they're, for about a quarter of them, willing to pay not to have the option. And then we want to see whether those agents would prefer to take the option if they face the choice, or would resist. So I implement their preferences probabilistically. That allows me to generate a counterfactual, to observe subjects who tell me, please restrict my choice set, and yet will face the choice. What do I observe? So I was telling you I observed about a third of my sample that has these self-control preferences, so they prefer to restrict their choice set. And then when they face the choice, they think it's better to have the flexible menu than having the temptation for sure. So they think they're going to have self-control. When I ask them if they think they're going to have self-control, so I elicit their beliefs, they also tell me, yeah, I think I'm going to resist. And when they face the choice, they indeed resist. Virtually all of them. So most of the structure of temptation that I observe in my data set can be rationalized by those models of costly self-control. Another interesting thing that I don't know what to do with right now, really make of, is productivity. So I observed that during the experiment, subjects who faced a choice were less productive on that boring task than subjects who didn't. So we might want to use this type of methods to try to elicit self-control costs. And so this type of experiment connects very well with experiments in psychology that try to understand a little bit how our power to pursue tasks, persevere on tasks, and exert self-control might be impacted by facing choices, basically. And in economics, that's a bit of the beginning right now of trying to understand that structure.
Okay, thank you. Building on that relationship between economics and psychology, what is your opinion on why is it so important, this connection between these two fields, also taking into account who won now the Nobel Prize in Economics? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're absolutely at a very exciting time. Research, interdisciplinary research, I think for the last few decades, we've really tried to have interactions between psychology and economics, and actually more and more with sociology, anthropology, political science, and very often, I mean, if I want to be a bit unfair to economics, we come up with questions that are not always very interesting and relevant to the psychology of human behavior and the way we make decisions. And working with psychologists kind of inform us of the interesting questions. And if we could use our methodologies to shed new light on those questions, I think that's very useful. So I think we are a very, very exciting time. It's very nice that we have a Nobel Prize in behavioral science. And Dick Thaler really, I think, made a lot of efforts to bring the knowledge of behavioral science to a larger audience. And I hope that working with other scientists who do not have necessarily the same background, we might have start new questions and questions also the knowledge we have. And so I think that's where the intersection between economics and psychology is the most fruitful. And I hope that will continue on that direction.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Thanks for having us.